Backwards and forwards, forwards and backwards, up and down and even sideways for all moments in the day. This is the story of world markets. It's a game of high stakes with winners and losers. This is the Moneymakers. I'm Bruce Whitfield. Tonight I speak only to winners. Chris Gilmour from Absa Wealth and Investment Management and Sasha Naryshkine, who's the director at Vestact, on how to stay level-headed and make money in topsy-turvy markets. Okay, we're talking about level-headed, so we'll skip you for now, Sasha. Over to Chris Gilmour. Is it possible to stay level-headed? I talk to people on a daily basis about markets, and more people are getting frightened.
Bruce, I think all you have to do is look at a long-term picture of the all-share index, going back to 1960. Yeah, exactly. And if you look at all the little blips that appear in it, 1987, which is the first real big, nasty correction in the market.
22% down in a day.
Yeah. Now that seemed like the end of the world. It was horrible. But in fact, if you look at it on the long-term basis today, it's just a tiny little blip. The global financial crisis of 2008, similarly, emerging markets crisis of 1998. And what I'm trying to say to you is, in the longer term, these things kind of look pretty puny in comparison.
John Maynard Keynes said famously, in the long term, we're all dead.
Yes.
So, not to be too pessimistic, but if you go back as far as 1929 and you look at the Dow Jones Industrial Average, which lost 90% of its value between 29 and 32, it wasn't until about 1955 that the Dow, 54, beg your pardon, thank you, Sasha, that the Dow recovered to its 1929 level. Yes. Are we, Sasha, in a scenario where that could feasibly occur? Or are we just better manipulators of markets and economies now than we were then?
You've got to understand the history back then, and I've read quite a lot of that history. Like stocks like GE and Goldman Sachs were trading on multiples of 100 plus, and there was an enormous amount of leverage. So are we there? Certainly not. So I think at the end of the day, it depends on what you own, because you can own legacy businesses, right? You can think, oh, this is a great business. They've always done well. I mean,
Roynet,
for
example.
Exactly, and people pricing things on metrics saying, oh, well, on a price-to-book basis, it looks very cheap. Not too dissimilar to like Credit Suisse right now, right? I think Credit Suisse trades on 0.65 to book, but that's because maybe people don't believe the book. So I think at the end of the day, it comes down to what you own. And you're right. Warren Buffett, what did he say? Invariably, you better own a business that could be run by idiots, because eventually it will be.
But we're in a scenario now where things are really difficult. Now, take your point. If you go back to 1960 and you look at Sharpeville, it doesn't register on a 40 or 50-year graph, although then it caused mass emigration in the same way as load shedding and other issues, Boipatong and other incidents in South African history, more recent South African history have. You go through 1969 where the industrial index on the JSE was up 4 times over a single decade. Oil crisis of 1970s, it dropped by half once again. In the moment, we do tend to distort chaos.
No, we do. There's a little part of the brain called the amygdala, which I'm sure you're very familiar with.
I'm just going to sit back.
Okay.
This might take a while.
It's an old remnant. It's in the temporal lobe. And this is the part of the brain that humans use for discerning danger. Okay? Now, media people know all about that, you see, and that's why we're fed a continuous diet of bad news, because the amygdala sees this, it receives it, and it's fantastic, and we love bad news.
A bit of adrenaline, and we run.
If it bleeds, it leads.
Yes.
Okay?
You understand this? But just let me just say for the record that you've bled and led yourself many times in the past.
No stranger to that. But what I'm trying to get at, Bruce, is when there seems to be no good news around, and the media's throwing this at you, and other analysts and investors and whatever, you've got to try and just take a step back and look at reality. We're in a situation today where, although we might not realize it, we're probably not that far from a situation where we're going to have abundant energy for many, many years, if not decades to come. I'm talking renewable energy here, right? So that's going to reduce the cost of doing business for a long, long time. Technology is going to come, and I'm sure Sasha will agree with me here, companies like the likes of Google and Apple and whatever, they've only scratched the surface about how things are going to change in the not too distant future. So while we're seeing this kind of strange situation at the beginning of January, which I've never seen before when it comes to markets being so volatile, I think I must sit back and say, is the world really so bad? Are things really so awful? Not really. We've got an overheated market, absolutely, and we've been saying this for a while. Once it comes back to more reasonable levels, and there's an awful lot of cheap money still sloshing around in the world, I think we're going to get some sort of sense of equilibrium coming back into play.
But it's about getting a grip on reality, Sasha. And I mean, that reality is quite hard to discern sometimes. People talk down the United States, which is still creating 150,000 blooming jobs every single month. Wages are starting to go up in America. They're talking down China, which is still growing at 6-ish%. They're talking down the Southeast Asian economies. They're talking down Europe, where Mario Draghi has made it very clear that he's got a big tap and he's prepared to turn it and keep pouring money into the European system. For us as Africans, we've got a problem in that commodity prices are low. So what is our reality in that global context?
Young people.
We have lots of young people
coming off a very low base, and those people will grab the technology that Chris talks about and run with it much better than older populations.
The fourth industrial revolution, however, World Economic Forum, don't look at me with that look, tells us that in the next 5 years, 5 to 7 million jobs will go as a result of that technology. So it's actually an inhibitor to growth potentially of personal growth, and may be good for economies, but it broadens the divide.
Johan Rupert made an excellent point. I think it was about 18 months ago, an FT Luxury piece where they asked him that question. And he said, don't just think that all jobs with low skill sets are going to go. He said, well, what happens if somebody does an MRI and a computer can now tell you what the outcome is, but someone cutting hair, you can't essentially get a computer to cut your hair and say, make me look.
It seems to work for you.
Me and Ted Cruz, yeah. But he is a computer. To say to someone, give me the hairstyle of Jennifer Aniston or Ryan Reynolds or whoever, that still needs to be done by a human. So I wouldn't say that all kind of skilled or unskilled jobs are at risk, but this will allow us to be a lot more productive in other areas. I mean, who would have thought 10 years ago that there could be a job as a social media editor, content expert, or whatever? But these are these are real jobs, that exist. People get paid money for it. So jobs, and they say the kids born today, 2/3 of the jobs that they're going to do haven't even been invented yet. So I don't know. I'm always optimistic about the future.
And it is, but it's important. That long-term view is important. We're going through a crisis of confidence in markets right now.
Banks.
But it's at banks. And when banks go wobbly, and when the CEO of a bank writes to his staff to say, don't worry, guys, everything's fine, I immediately get suspicious. Because that's what the CEO of Deutsche has done, isn't he? I mean, he's gone to, guys, everything is absolutely fine.
Well, and Wolfgang Schäuble, the German finance minister, said everything's okay. So you get a sense that markets are a little bit jittery, and the share prices of Credit Suisse and other banks trading at like a quarter of a century low. I mean, it's not often you hear about big.
Why are they
bulge bracket
that
banks?
Low?
I think in part exposure to oil markets, but I don't think it's as big as subprime. It's nowhere near as big. In fact, the quantum that I read, something like 180 to 190 billion dollars. I mean, it's, people sneeze at those sort of numbers nowadays. But I think also people are worried about slowing growth globally, and I think the Chinese story shifting from being investment led to consumption has maybe caught a few people also off guard.
So, not concerned. If you two are not concerned, why are global markets in such a tiz?
Cheap.
Well, yeah, but that's precisely what it is. It gives them something to talk about. I mean, when the market's going up like that, there's no end, and but everyone's talking so incredibly bullishly. If you take a graph of the S&P 500 and go back 15, 20 years and do it against CPI, the American market in real terms has hardly moved. But yes, your channel here, CNBC and Bloomberg and all these other, and these wonderful news companies. I mean, it's incredible. You look at the enthusiasm that comes out. It's quite incredible. And now on the way down, it's all this gloom and doom. It's fantastic. It creates talking pieces.
It creates really talking pieces. Does it create? Okay, tell me about the irony. They want to talk about opportunity.
Because I think the irony is the opportunity.
Yeah.
So whenever these moments come along, no one ever takes them. But we're all young people.
We are.
Chris,
yes, we are.
We are. You should use these as opportunities, because when they come on, they're very few and far between. So you should hope, as a long-term investor who's always adding, that these moments come along all the time.
I couldn't agree with you more. The trouble is when opportunities present themselves, there's always the risk that a better opportunity is lying just down the road, because
Well, then you buy again, dollar cost averaging.
But our inbuilt safety mechanisms tell us it's going to get worse before it gets better. And by the time it's got better, we've missed the opportunity.
Yeah,
and
that's
the
also
risk.
true. But just coming back to a point that that Sasha was making earlier, in terms of the banks, look at what's happening in the US particularly, and to a certain extent here. You're getting what is generically referred to as Fintech. There was a lady from JP Morgan, Blythe Masters, is running a Fintech in the US, and extremely successfully, to the extent that she snubbed a number of very big fancy jobs elsewhere. These companies are doing exceptionally well. The big banks, I think, are struggling to compete with these small, nimble operations that are providing exactly what the consumers are wanting. And it comes back to what we talked earlier about technology coming to the fore.
Well, you look at, Capitec is a case in point.
That's the one.
It's trading at $500 a share. The rest
On a
of the
20
banking
multiple.
and the rest of the banking sector is in retreat. You go on a Saturday morning to a shopping centre. Where are people standing at ATMs?
Or on their apps.
Fewer Capitec customers maybe on their apps. Maybe that's why there are not so many in the branches of the big four banks. But they've used technology very effectively to deliver cost-effective, simple services.
Huh? So does FNB. They've delivered enormous cost savings and technological advantage.
They most certainly have. But that is the opportunity that also risks destabilizing them at some point in the future. Goodness knows, Adrian Gore won't tell us his secret about what he's doing with Discovery Bank. We know it's coming.
I think it'll be a little bit more like the Investec model.
I
Catering
suspect
for
so.
high wealth individuals, single branch, the rest online.
I suspect so. But it's those kind of disruptions that actually make the banking sector very nervous. And that's a good thing, right?
That's great for consumers.
But what does it do then to stability of financial markets?
Look, I think in terms of the A1 banks in South Africa, they'll always be backstopped by South African Reserve Bank and by extension Treasury and by extension the taxpayer. The same will be said for all the bulge bracket banks in the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis.
Who were the big beneficiaries? The big banks?
Well, I suppose if you worked at Lehman Brothers, you wouldn't think so. And if you worked on many trading desks globally, those jobs have all been chopped.
Yeah.
So those people have got pink slips, which leads me to believe that the people inside of those financial institutions that are always telling you the world is ending have seen their colleagues walking out with a lot of cardboard boxes. Yeah.
Absolutely. Let's leave it there. Sasha Naryshkine, Director of Vestact, Chris Gilmour from Absa Wealth and Investment Management for giving us insights into the world which is not coming to an end. And even if we do see big pullbacks, go and have a look at the graphs that Chris Gilmour was talking about and then plot key historical dates along those graphs. Sharpeville is a big one. The 1970s oil crisis is another. The Rubicon speech, 1987. The dawn of democracy in South Africa, Boipatong, that sort of era. They hardly register on a long-term graph. There'll be more about markets, turmoil, losses, risks, and opportunities to talk more all about markets. That's next time. Good night.